Now, continue to talking about the conflict of cultures. I love this next subject we're going to talk about. It's called the Harlem Renaissance, Harlem, New York, and the Renaissance means rebirth or renewal. During the early 19th, 20th century, Black Americans fled the South, no doubt. I can completely understand why they would do that. And they ended up going to large American cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, Chicago, and in particular, they come to New York City. Now, what emerged from Harlem, which is one of the areas of New York City, was a huge, incredible burst of literature, of writing, of poetry, stage productions, and of course of music. This became known as the Harlem Renaissance. Let me play this quick video for you, talking a little bit more about what the Harlem Renaissance was.
For many, the 1920s evokes images of flappers and speakeasies. But for one group of Americans, the decade was also one of rebirth. It was known as the Harlem Renaissance. For the first time, African American writers, artists, and musicians won renown for their contributions to world culture. Their goal? To find outlets for group expression and self-determination as a means of achieving equality and civil rights. When World War I broke out, American factories experienced a shortage of workers. Many Black Americans living in the South saw this as their chance for a better life. They migrated in droves to northern cities, such as Chicago, Detroit, and New York. The New York City neighborhood of Harlem, in particular, attracted a large number of African American artists and intellectuals. It wasn't long before Harlem became the epicenter of an artistic explosion. Works produced during the Harlem Renaissance appealed not just to blacks, but crossed over to white audiences as well. The musical Shuffle Along, written by and starring African Americans, became a smash hit on Broadway.
I'm just wild about Harry, and Harry's wild about me.
Langston Hughes was among the period's most famous writers. Known for his folksy humor, he was nicknamed the O. Henry of Harlem. Other writers included Countee Cullen, James Weldon Johnson, and Zora Neale Hurston. Great artists also emerged on the Harlem scene, such as Aaron Douglas and Augusta Savage, who opened her own studio and taught sculpture to other African Americans. And then there were jazz legends, among them Duke Ellington, Bessie Smith, and Cab Calloway. After the stock market crashed in 1929, the country fell into the Great Depression, and the Harlem Renaissance began to fade. But by then, the movement had already forged a path for future generations and ushered in a new era in American culture and politics.
Now, in addition to the Harlem Renaissance, or actually speaking of the Harlem Renaissance, I want to talk about jazz music. Now, jazz became incredibly popular during the 1920s and really is the defining sound of that decade. There was some aversion to it, some resistance to it by conservatives who viewed it as having sexual overtones, but then parents usually don't like their kids' type of music anyway, so there you go. The best nightclubs in the world to hear jazz music were found in New York City, and these were ones like the famous Cotton Club. There was also radio stations that played and recording studios in New York City. So this is really, as far as jazz music, New York as well as Louisiana, in New Orleans, in Louisiana, were the places where you could hear great live jazz music. So there you go, jazz music, part of the Harlem Renaissance.